Women in jewelry are passionate and cultured, intelligent and creative, hardworking and imaginative. They are brilliant. We imagine the jewelry world as a light and opulent sector. The reality is different. It is a world that demands excellency in all areas. A world of hard work, from artisans with fairy-like hands to international groups with supranational power. And is this protean work? Women have had to find their place, and they succeed because they are brilliant. In this podcast, Brillante, I will take you not behind the scenes, but into the reality of the world of jewelry by interviewing women in the jewelry industry. Each time, I ask them to give advice to young women who might be tempted by this world where the glitter of a shop window hides the demands of work and personal investment, so that the next generation can prepare to become brilliant. I'm with Vivienne Becker. Vivienne Becker is art history and curator in jewels, and she is founder of Designer Vivarium at GEM Genève. And I was really lucky because Vivienne is just in front of me. Hello, Vivienne.
Hello.
Vivienne, can you tell me how is your first remember about jewels? Are you always fell in love in jewels?
I actually don't remember how I fell in love with jewels, and I want to say at the beginning that my whole work, well, my whole career, if you can call it that, has been an accident, a happy accident, and where I never planned. I don't think, certainly when I started, that you could plan to be a jewelry writer. So it's been serendipity, as we say. One thing has led to another. So I don't really remember when or if I fell in love with jewels, but I do remember a ring that my father bought for me in the Portobello Road market. I grew up in London's Notting Hill, around the Portobello Road area. And there's a very famous antiques market, and when I would go with my father, accompany him to work, I would always ask to look around the market, and he bought me a ring, a cheap little ring, but thinking about it, and I know I have it somewhere at home, it looked like an antique jewel, though I'm sure at that age I didn't know or understand what it was. It was a cluster, it was just metal, cheap costume jewellery with some glass or some plastic stones in it, a turquoise cluster. So that does stick in my mind.
Have you this ring again?
I think I have it. Yes, I think I have it at home. But then I have to say, I had no thought of jewelry. It's not in the family. My mother had a few simple pieces of jewelry, but nothing much. Came from quite a humble family. So jewelry was not part of my world at all. But what happened was that when I was 18, I think, and just about to finish school, I took a holiday job in an antiques market in London. We have covered, these indoor antiques markets. I have absolutely no idea why. I wanted a holiday job. I guess I was attracted to antiques for some reason that I don't know. And I was painfully shy. I mean, I was cripplingly shy, but I walked into this very old, very tatty indoor antiques market. And, in my quiet way, I just said, does anyone need someone to work for them? And they said, yes, there was someone around the corner, an antique jewelry dealer who was taking another booth, stall. There are all these little stalls, and they need someone to manage the small booth. Anyway, they took me on, they trusted me, ended up staying there. I ended up staying there for about 3 years. And I guess it was my very mild rebellion at 18. I decided not to go to university. or to postpone university. My parents were absolutely horrified when I came home and said, I've got a job in a market, market. And really those markets were kind of, dusty, old, say dirty, my teachers were absolutely horrified. But I stumbled on a world that welcomed me, that made me feel, warm and welcome, and it was fun. It was so different from my rather conventional upbringing. I was very lucky because it's a long time ago. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but it's a very long time ago in the antiques trade. Can never happen again. So it was full of people a bit like me who didn't fit in where they came from. So they were all escaping from something, from a conventional world. There were a lot of out of work actors and actresses. They were deeply eccentric, but the unifying part was that they were all absolutely passionate about the antiques that they sold. And there wasn't all jewellery. There were ceramics dealers, metal dealers, a lot of silver dealers, and quite a lot of antique jewellery dealers. They became my second family. They're still my friends. The ones who've survived all these years. They taught me everything. They were so generous with their knowledge. Every day people would come round and pull treasures out of their pockets, wonderful antique jewels, and they would explain to me. There was, mourning jewels, a dealer that was known as Harry Death, because he only dealt in mourning jewels and he wore black, and rumour had it that he slept in a coffin. So it was, for me it was a magical world. There was the world expert on paste jewellery, on antique paste jewellery, and he explained everything to me. And I had a wonderful time. I was really, really lucky. And at the end of those few years, I thought, well, I have to get a proper job. And actually, I've been saying that to myself for all these decades since, that I have to get a proper job. I realised that I wasn't cut out to be an antique jewellery dealer. I just wasn't a dealer. Although I did buy and sell at that time. I was encouraged to buy and sell some pieces, so I did a little bit of dealing. But I'd always wanted to write. I always wanted to be a journalist, and I was lucky then to find a job. By the way, I decided not to go back to university. I just couldn't. I'd moved on too much. And I was lucky enough to find a job as a fashion assistant on a women's magazine when I stayed there for a while. And while I was there, I met the editor of a magazine called Antique Collector, met him at the photocopying machine and offered him an article on antique jewellery, because I thought I could do it. And he said yes, and then I wrote a few articles for him, and then I joined the staff of that magazine, writing about jewellery, but also about other aspects of antiques. So my background is really in jewellery history. I think after that I kept thinking I better get a proper job, but I kept writing about jewellery. And then I married when I was very young. I was very young. This all started, when I, 18, 19, in my early 20s. And when I was married, I decided to go freelance. That was when I wrote my first book. So I was very young when I wrote my first book. What I have to say is that no one was writing about jewellery at the time. As I say, it was just an accident. And just because I wrote one article, then I wrote another, and I kept doing it. Yeah, it was quite difficult. I just wrote to a lot of editors and said, please, can I write an article about antique jewellery? And it's a different time then. People said yes. I had a column in a jewellery trade paper because I had lots of friends in the antique jewellery trade. To just want to stress how encouraging everyone was, how generous in sharing their knowledge and encouraging me to write about the subject that they loved and that they'd never seen represented in newspapers or magazines. So, as I say, no one was writing about jewellery, but I had a column in the trade paper that the publisher thought would make a good book. That was my first book. And, I've just been writing about jewellery ever since, still thinking I better get a proper job.
And now you are wrote 28, 29 book. In all this book, what is your best remember?
Writing the books. Oh, gosh, it's
really hard because
it is
near 30 books.
Yes. Of course, to write the first book and to have my first book published when I was in my 20s, was really, it was so exciting for me. And let me think, an interesting story is that when the first book came out, it was called Antique and 20th Century Jewellery. And there were very few books on jewellery history at the time, and they were old, but they were books that had been written a long time previously. And I was contacted by someone in America. He was actually an ear, nose and throat surgeon whose passion was jewellery. I mean, the thing about jewellery is that it inspires passion in people. He was a collector of Art Nouveau jewellery. He ran as a summer course on jewellery history. He invited me to go to Maine, to the University of Maine. It was dear Dr. Sataloff to give some lectures and to sell my books, which I did. And that introduced me to Art Nouveau jewellery, which is still my personal passion and my academic speciality. So I guess through all the books, it's Art Nouveau. And I spent several years working on my book, which is called Art Nouveau Jewellery. And as far as I know, it's still the only book that covers the subject. So yeah, that was a high point for me.
You wrote books about famous maisons.
Yes.
As the Grisogeno,
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
And you wrote books about history, Art Nouveau or antique. Is it different to write this different sort of book?
Yes, very different. As I say, for the take the book on Art Nouveau jewellery. I mean, I spent, I guess, at least 2 years researching it. Maybe it was more, maybe a year or maybe 2 writing it. When it comes to brand books, and I have done a lot recently, it's different because you don't have to, not so much original primary research, trying to find the primary source references. The material generally is there at the maison, and the books tend not to be so long, the text is not so long. But I have to say that, again, I just feel very, very lucky because with each of those books on the brands, I've dipped into their history, into their heritage. Yeah, it's different. And of course, book publishing is so different today from how it was in the 1980s and 90s. It's very different. It's quick. Everything is quicker. Production is quicker. It's much better. The printing and the look and the design is very different.
And what's your process? You have an idea and you find an editor, or it's the opposite, or is the maison who asks to you?
Yes, I mean it's a mix of both, and with Art Nouveau it was my idea. That's what I wanted to. I had an agent at the time, a literary agent, and we took it to a publisher, and they said yes, and then the process started. With the brand books, I have to say it's mainly the brands who've approached me, the maisons who've approached me to write the book, and then I would work with them and discuss what the story would be. So that it's not just not a pure vanity project, that there is a real story. So what I love to do is always to dig deep into the history of the maison. I think very interesting was writing about Sivan Bichachi. I don't know if you know of Sivan. He's a Turkish jeweler, an incredible character. And I've written 2 books about Sivan, and I spent time with him in Istanbul. And so that, again, sent me into the world of the Ottoman jewelled arts. And this is how I learned. This is what I love. The research is what I really, really love. So the book about Sivan really tells the story of Ottoman jewellery, Armenian metal smithing. So there always has to be a historical aspect to it, which I will find.
Another part of your job is you are curator. How you begin?
God, I never know. How do I begin? Well, let's say that another part of this story I have to mention, because for many, many years I was the jewellery consultant to Swarovski, the Austrian crystal company. And that came about through another book, actually, which was it was called Fabulous Fakes, and it was the history of costume jewellery. Because again, from my time working in the antique market, I mentioned paste, which is crystal jewellery. I thought there's this whole section of jewellery that's made of humble materials, non-precious materials, that's worn for fashion, or it's some kind of imitation. And so I wrote the history of fashion jewels, and that brought me to that made me discover Swarovski. Maybe that's for another podcast, because it's a long story. I was captivated by the history of the company. They began in 1895, and when I first approached them, they were very secretive. I did manage to include them in the book, and after that they approached me to be one of the curators of a big exhibition they were planning of 20th century fashion jewellery. Yes, I was a curator, and then I took over the curation of the whole exhibition, and it travelled the world for about 10 years, and it came to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which was really, really exciting. Got the most important curatorial job that I had after Art Nouveau. I was approached by the Goldsmiths Company, that's the worshipful company of goldsmiths in London, to curate an exhibition of jewels by Lalique, the jewels of René Lalique, and that's my real passion. Again, I was young, I was incredibly lucky. It was a real dream project. I worked on it for, I think, 2 years preparing, a long time setting up, but it was the first major exhibition of the jewels of Lalique since his time at the turn of the century. And then I curated another exhibition for Swarovski on ethnic jewels. I curate the designer vivarium, which showcases the work of contemporary individual independent jewelers around the world.
In all this job, what part do you prefer?
Without doubt, it's the studying and the learning. Love the research. On the days when I work at home, writing is kind of an isolated task. But I love it when I can just dip into my books and start researching a new subject. Just very lucky that every day I'm learning something new or seeing something beautiful. Again, seeing beautiful objects all the time is really life-enhancing and enriching. And then meeting the people involved, people.
What is your personal graal? Find something never people find?
It's all exciting. I think it's all exciting. Yeah, discovering something, discovering a new designer is wonderful. I will say, if I find, these days when I'm working a lot with contemporary designers, if I find a new designer who I think is doing something really innovative, really moving the jewellery history along, then that's very exciting. To see a historic jewel, and to handle it. I recently, a year or so, well, actually probably was before COVID, so it's more, I was at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the museum had just acquired the coronet that Queen Victoria wore. It was a sapphire and diamond coronet, and it hadn't been put out yet. So I was very lucky to be able to see and handle it. That's really exciting, you can feel, you can sense and smell history. And the fact that it had been worn by Queen Victoria. She always wore it on the back of her head, on her little chignon, and it's very small. These jewels have an energy, they reverberate with history. As we're talking about women, they reverberate with the scent of the woman. There's something intensely intimate and personal, and I find that very exciting.
You founded the Vivarium Designer at Gem Genève.
At the beginning, Ronnie Totar and Thomas Faber, via Jasmine Vidal, who was working with them, they asked me to come and talk to them. They told me their plans for Gem Genève, and they said that they always want to nurture new talent. That's been very, very important part of the mission of Gem Genève. And they asked if I'd be interested in curating a section of the show. First, they said that would be for young jewellers or new jewellers. And I said I would love to do that, but it wasn't only young jewellers that I wanted to focus on. It was individual jewellers who they just don't have a big enough voice in the industry. Of course, I love the maisons, but They have, huge marketing power. They have a huge voice. And I felt that I wanted to give a platform and a voice to individual designer jewelers around the world, to contemporary jewels, and not only young or student jewelers, but they could be any age, but the ones who were little known, to raise their profile, the designers who are under the radar, working in a really original way. And that's how it started.
All are very really specific and original. Do you think they become the maison about tomorrow?
Oh, I don't think they will. They come from it's a different spirit. There's something different that drives them. I don't think that they want to grow into a big maison. I think it's their individuality that's important to them, singular, well-defined, creative vision that they have. But, who knows? Again, some of them grow into what we call boutique brands, so smaller brands. It depends how they want to grow, really. Yeah.
Have you some project, and can you tell them?
So there was a lot of different things going on at the same time. I'm still writing. I still write a lot of articles. I'm a contributing editor to the Financial Times luxury magazine, which is HTSI, which was called How to Spend It, and now is just its initials, HTSI. I have a regular column on Philips online magazine, Philips the auction house. But Vivarium is my big venture at the moment, so I've broadened it out. I mean, we call it the Designer Vivarium at Gem Genève, but it's part of a bigger venture for me, and I have a business partner in it now, Diana Cordell. But it's focused very much on individual designer jewelers from around the world, giving them a platform, representing them, operating almost as a gallery, as a virtual gallery for independent jewelers. We are organizing small, intimate, personal, private selling events that are always linked to some kind of educational aspect, because as you can tell from the podcast, I love to talk about jewelry. So, and I find that people are really hungry for information. It's a very complex subject. It's fascinating, but complex. As I say, people love to learn about it, and I love to talk about it. So we organize Vivarium events for individual jewelers or groups of jewelers or even the maisons on a theme, with a talk by me, or maybe in conversation, a discussion with a designer. So I think it may be part of the mission of Vivarium is to enrich the jewelry purchasing experience, to combine it with education. Please, can your listeners come up with a sexier word than education? So setting the jewelry in context, in historical design context. Talking about women in jewelry is very important to me as well.
So to finish this interview, it's a gimmick question. What is your advice for a young lady who wants to do the same as you?
Well, my instinct is to say, find something else. You have to be driven by real passion for jewelry. As I say, mine was a total accident, but I think you have to be driven by real passion for knowledge. What I would like to say is, read, learn as much as possible. There's no real shortcut. I think today everyone wants their knowledge instantly. It's taken me a long time. So I'm not telling you how many years. It's taken me a very long time. And the more I learn, the more I realize I have to learn. So my advice is to put the time in with books. People don't read books anymore. So please, read books, learn as much as possible. And if you want to be a jewelry writer, please, please, please back it up with real in-depth knowledge. Yeah, and the way forward to writing about contemporary jewelry always has to be through history.
So really, thank you, Vivienne. Have a good time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Je vous invite à me faire part de vos commentaires pour Vivienne Becker sur les réseaux sociaux d'Il était une fois les bijoux. Je suis Anne Desmarais de Jotan et je donne une voix aux bijoux chaque dimanche. Et si vous aussi vous avez envie de faire parler vos bijoux et votre maison, je serai ravie de vous accompagner pour réaliser votre podcast de marque ou vous accueillir en partenaire dans mes podcasts natifs. Cet épisode était le 12e de la saison 2. Le prochain inaugurera la saison 3. En attendant, je vous donne rendez-vous la semaine prochaine sur le podcast Le bijou comme un bisou pour une capsule spéciale sur le salon J'aime Genève. Quant au podcast thématique Il était une fois le bijou, le prochain thème est en pleine création. Pour ne manquer aucun de nos rendez-vous du dimanche autour du bijou, abonnez-vous à chacun de ces 3 podcasts sur votre plateforme d'écoute préférée. Mettez de jolis commentaires, des étoiles et surtout, partagez l'épisode, c'est ce qui permet de doper le référencement des podcasts. À dimanche prochain et soyez brillantes.